In this lesson, we're going to talk about active versus inactive relationships in Power BI. For the purpose of this demo, I've imported two tables, dim date and fact internet sales. Let's go over to the model view and see what these two tables are all about. Now, we get to see dim date and fact internet sales, two independent tables. They're not currently related to each other, they're not connected to each other, they're not joined to each other, they're two independent tables. If we had to create visuals that contain columns from these two tables, what do you guys think would happen? Do you expect for the data to be filtered, sliced and diced accordingly? Now let's take a look. So I'm going to choose a bar chart and I am going to load the bar chart with the full date alternate key. So this will give us the full date hierarchy. And as values, we're going to add the total sales. In our case, that will be the sales amount. Power BI will automatically sum it up and populate the visual. Now, do you see anything wrong with it? So it looks like the sales amount is equal for every year available in our date hierarchy. Now, this is clearly not the case and something is definitely wrong. If you see something like this in your charts, this means that something's definitely wrong with your data. Usually it's something to do with relationships. Now let's go back over to the model view and create a relationship between these two tables. In our case would be the date key. We would connect it with due date key. So this will create an active relationship between dim date and fact internet sales. Now, as soon as we go back to our report view, everything looks perfect. So this kind of like makes sense. So we've got the sales amount for 2011, 2012, 2013 and 2014. This looks fine. Now, this is an active relationship. But in Power BI, there's also inactive relationships. Now, let's go back to the model and create an inactive relationship. So an inactive relationship would be, again, starting with the date key, and we would connect it to order date key. So we're going to connect it to order date key. This will create an inactive relationship. Now, the active relationship contains this full straight line. The inactive ones contain the dotted line, which is this dotted line. So this is how we know which relationship is active or inactive. Now, if we go back to the model and if we create the same sort of table, Power BI would give us the exact same result. Why? Because from the dim date, we're using the date key that's currently connected to fact internet sales based on the due date key. So if we want to create a visual that contains the information based on the order date key rather than due date key, how are we going to go about this? Power BI's got a built-in function to handle these sort of scenarios called use relationship, which can be used inside a measure. Now, why is this important? Because you cannot use relationship inside a measure if you don't have an inactive relationship between these two tables. So let's see how this is going to work. Just going to go back to the report view and we're going to create a measure. So I'm going to go to new measure. Now, measures will be covered in detail in section 4. For the purpose of this demo, we're showing you the context here to know how use relationship works. So I'm going to call this measure use relationship equals. We're going to call out a function called calculate. And what we want to calculate is we want to have the sum of sales amount, okay, comma, and it's going to use relationship. Use relationship is asking for two parameters, column 1 and column 2. From dim date, we want the date key. This is our column 1. From fact underscore internet sales, we want the order key, order date key. Okay. And we are going to close the brackets. We're going to hit enter. And our measure is now ready. So we can test our measure inside a new visual. So I'm going to select another bar chart. Select another bar chart. It's going to be populated with our use relationship function that we just created. And we're going to populate it with the full date alternate key. As soon as we add this now looks like a proper chart, okay? So we can see that this chart is not the same as this chart because on this chart we are looking at a different date key. So if this was the sales amount by due date, this is the sales amount by order date. Okay, this kind of makes sense. So if we remove the inactive relationship, so I'm just gonna right click and press delete. Yes, we want to delete this relationship. And if we go back to our report view, this visual will break. See, something's wrong with one or more fields. So use relationship requires to have an existing relationship between the two tables. So I'm just going to connect it again. So date key is going to be connected with order date key. And this is going to fix our visual. Now, this is one way of handling inactive relationships. Another way to deal with inactive relationships is to remove the cause to create it. If having multiple relationships between two tables is causing the creation of inactive relationships, it would be logical to create multiple instances of the smaller table and create separate relationships. So, what do we mean? Well, I am going to create multiple instances of the dim date table, and instead of using a function to deal with the multiple relationships, we're going to create another instance of dim date that would basically be connected on order date key, and this will allow us to filter it based on order date key. And by doing so, we're going to have an active relationship with dim date, an active relationship with the dim date copy, and these two relationships would be active with fact internet sales. Okay, how are we going to do that? Well, I'm going to go to data, then we're going to go to modeling, and I'm going to press new table. In new table, I am going to type this DAX code. So the new table will be called order date. Let's call it order date. This will equal to all dim underscore date. And this will return a copy of the entire dim underscore date table. Just going to wait a few seconds for the engine to parse this formula. Now we've got the exact same copy of dim date. Now, an important thing here to know is that once we are creating copies of existing tables, we are loading them inside our Power BI model. So this means that this will consume more resources if we do it that way, because essentially we're importing the same table twice. The more tables we import, the heavier our model is going to get. Now, this is an alternative approach, and I'm showing you this alternative approach for the demo purposes. In real life scenarios, it's best to use the function that we've discussed earlier, which is use relationship. Now, if we go back to the model, we get to see this other table. It's called order date. Now, from order date, we can create another relationship based on date key. In our case, will be order date key. And this will transform our model into a star schema. So we've got one too many, one too many. We've got this inactive relationship, which is fine. Now we can use our new date to create another chart. So I am going to minimize these slightly. So we've got space for our third chart. So our third chart would contain order date. We'll grab the full date alternate key, which is going to give us the full date hierarchy. From fact internet sales, we're going to grab the internet sales. So this will be sales amount. So we've got the sales amount now by year based on the order date. And we've got two identical tables. This table is using the measure that we've created, use relationship. This table is essentially showing us the same values by creating a copy of the dim date table. And this is how active versus inactive relationships work. It's based on your preference which approach you guys are going to use. I would recommend you to use functions and keep your model as tidy and clean as possible. And we'll see each other in our next lesson.